Hello, and welcome. Have you ever found yourself thinking about a taste from your childhood? Not just a dish, but a specific flavor, a texture, a memory so vivid you can almost feel the fork in your hand and hear the sounds of the kitchen around you. In talking about the kind of food that doesn't show up on slick cooking shows or in glossy magazines anymore. These are the culinary ghosts of a bygone era, the recipes that were born from necessity, crafted with ingenuity, and served with a quiet, powerful love. They were the dishes that fed families through the leanest of times, that stretched $1 until it screamed, and that left an indelible mark on our collective palate. But as time marches on, these recipes are fading. They're being packed away in the attic of our memory, like dusty photo albums we forget to open. And it begs the question, what exactly are we losing when we let these flavors disappear? Is it just a list of ingredients and instructions? Or is it something more? A connection to our past, a testament to resilience, a story of who we once were. Tonight, we're going on a journey. We're going to open that dusty album, dust off these forgotten recipes and explore the stories they have to tell. We're going to taste the past, one humble, brilliant, and often very strange dish at a time. Let's begin with something that might sound familiar, but I assure you, its original form is a world away from what you know today: cold macaroni salad with peas and pickles. Now, when I say macaroni salad, I need you to erase the image from your mind of a modern deli counter creation. Forget the artisanal, sun-dried tomatoes, the Kalamata olives, the feta cheese, the sprinkle of expensive microgreens. This wasn't that. The Depression-era macaroni salad was a masterclass in economic alchemy, a dish designed to turn pennies into a feast and to stretch a single, precious source of protein into a meal for a crowd. It started with a full pound of elbow macaroni, the cheapest, most filling pasta available. A mother would boil it on the stovetop, not to a perfect al dente, but until it was soft and swollen, maximizing its volume. The goal wasn't culinary perfection. It was pure, unadulterated bulk. Then came the additions, a frugal mosaic of whatever was on hand. Frozen peas, a modern convenience that was just becoming accessible, would be tossed in, their bright green color a cheerful lie against the backdrop of economic hardship. They'd be blanched for just a moment, keeping a slight pop. Then came the tangy, electric surprise, chopped sweet pickles. This wasn't a garnish. It was a cornerstone of the flavor profile. The sweet, sharp crunch cut through the creaminess and provided a burst of excitement in an otherwise starky landscape. And when the family budget allowed, the holy grail of affordable protein, hard-boiled eggs. A few eggs, carefully chopped and folded in, transformed the dish from a simple side into a substantial main course. It was a small luxury, and finding a piece of egg in your spoonful felt like striking gold. The dressing was the true genius of the recipe. It was nothing more than simple mayonnaise, but thinned with a generous splash of the brine from the sweet pickle jar. This wasn't just a way to use up a byproduct. It was a flavor hack. The pickle juice infused the entire salad with its signature tang, cutting the richness of the mayo and creating a sharp, creamy coating that made every simple ingredient come alive. This dish was the undisputed king of social gatherings. You'd see it in giant Tupperware bowls at church picnics, glistening under the summer sun. It would appear at family reunions, spooned onto paper plates alongside fried chicken. It was the centerpiece of Sunday dinners, when the heat was so oppressive that turning on the oven felt like an act of madness. Its beauty was its profound adaptability. If you had a spare onion, you'd chop it in. If a bit of leftover ham from a previous meal was lingering in the isobox, it would be diced and celebrated. Some families added a sprinkle of paprika for color, others a dash of mustard for an extra kick. The children, the dish was a treasure hunt. They'd navigate their forks through the soft macaroni, searching for those coveted pockets of sweet pickle or the creamy yolk of a hard-boiled egg. For the adults, it was a quiet sigh of relief. This one bowl, assembled for less than $1, could comfortably feed 8 hungry people. It was more than just a salad. It was security, ingenuity, and community, all served cold. Next, let's travel to the heart of German and Eastern European kitchens for a dish whose sizzle and smell defined weekend mornings: potato pancakes with applesauce. Every family from these traditions had their own fiercely guarded version of these crispy, golden cakes, known as Kartoffelpuffer or Lachs. The process was a ritual, a labor of love that began with the humble potato. A mother would stand over the sink, the hands raw from peeling, and then she would face the true test of her patience, the box grater. These were brutal, four-sided metal contraptions, and the sound of potato against perforated steel was the soundtrack of Saturday breakfast. It was a race against time, grating the potatoes quickly before they oxidized and turned a dreary brown. More often than not, a rushed moment would result in scraped knuckless the battle scars of a dedicated cook. The resulting pile of pale, shredded potatoes would be squeezed of its excess water, a crucial step for achieving maximum crispiness. Then, it was mixed with a single beaten egg to act as a binder, a handful of flour for structure, and a generous pinch of salt. The batter was simple, elemental. It was then formed into flat, rustic patties and slid into a hot pan shimmering with fat. The choice of fat was a story in itself. If the family was well off, it might be precious, sweet butter. More commonly, it was rendered lard or, most prized, all leftover bacon grease, which infused the pancakes with a smoky, savoury depth. The key, the absolute art of the dish, was in the frying. The heat had to be just right, hot enough to create an shatteringly crisp, golden brown crust, while leaving the inside steaming, tender and almost creamy. The contrast was everything. And to complement this savoury, earthy delight, fresh apple sauce. This wasn't the sugary, bland stuff from a jar. It was made from apples picked from a backyard tree, cooked down with a little water and maybe a cinnamon stick until they collapsed into a chunky, fragrant puree. The natural sweetness and tartness of the apples provided the perfect counterpoint to the salty, fatty potato cakes. This was a weekend meal, because it demanded time. The grating, the frying, the constant attention, it wasn't a weekday rush job. Children would gather around the table, their faces flushed with anticipation, competing to see who could devour the most pancakes. Parents, watching them, felt a sense of profound satisfaction. They had taken a few humble potatoes, a root vegetable synonymous with peasant food, and transformed them into a meal that felt like a feast. The sizzling sound from the skillet, the rich, comforting aroma that filled the entire house, this was the smell of abundance, a sensory promise of comfort and family, even when times were unimaginably lean. As the summer sun began to wane and the threat of the first frost loomed, smart gardeners knew not to let their hard work go to waste. This brings us to a dish born from that very specific end-of-season anxiety, fried green tomato slices. Before the cold could turn their unripe bounty to mush, they would harvest the fern, green tomatoes from the vine. These weren't the juicy, red orbs of midsummer. They were hard, acidic, and seemingly useless. But in the hands of a resourceful cook, these unripe treasures were destined for a golden, crispy apotheosis. The process was a symphony of simplicity. Tomatoes were sliced thick, about a half-inch, to ensure they wouldn't disintegrate in the heat. Then, they were dredged in a shallow dish of cornmeal, seasoned liberally with salt and a coarse grind of black pepper. The cornmeal was key. Its gritty texture would create a crust with an unparalleled crunch. The coated slices were then carefully laid into a skillet of hot oil, often bacon grease or lard, for that extra layer of flavour. The moment they hit the pan, the kitchen would fill with a sharp, sizzling hiss. They were fried until the coating turned a deep, burnished gold and the tomato inside transformed, its texture becoming tender and yielding, its tartness mellowing into a pleasant, tangy bite. The magic was in that contrast, the crunchy, salty armour giving way to a soft, steamy, slightly sour interior. It was an irresistible sensation. Families would serve them in a multitude of ways. They were a perfect side dish for breakfast, nestled next to scrambled eggs and bacon. They appeared at dinner alongside a platter of fried chicken, their acidity cutting through the richness of the meat. Or they could be a simple, perfect lunch, served hot from the pan with nothing more than a slice of fresh, soft white bread to soak up any stray juices. The preparation was often a family affair. The children, armed with butter knives, could be trusted with the relatively safe task of slicing the tomatoes, while their mother managed the hot, spitting oil of the frying pan. There was an unspoken rule. Each slice had to be eaten almost immediately, passed from pan to plate to mouth while the coating was still at its peak crispness. To let one sit and go soggy was a culinary crime. This dish was the embodiment of the waste not, want not philosophy. It was a beautiful, practical act of defiance against the changing seasons, transforming what might have been discarded in the compost heap into something utterly delicious and profoundly memorable. Now, let's talk about a true feat of culinary magic, a dessert born from the strictures of wartime rationing, when certain ingredients were as precious as gold. I'm talking about the eggless mayonnaise cake. During periods of rationing, especially during the World Wars, eggs and butter became precious commodities, doled out with ration stamps and used only for the most special of occasions. But the human desire for a celebratory chocolate cake does not simply vanish in the face of adversity. Resourceful home bakers, faced with this challenge, discovered a secret weapon lurking in their pantries: mayonnaise. The idea sounds bizarre, even faintly repulsive to our modern sensibilities. But if you think about it, it's pure logic. What is mayonnaise? At its core, it's an emulsion of oil and egg yolks. It already contains the two key ingredients for a moist cake: fat and an emulsifier. So, a mother wanting to bake a birthday cake for her child would perform this quiet act of kitchen alchemy. She would mix together these dry ingredients: cocoa powder, flour, sugar, and baking soda. Then, instead of cracking eggs and creaming butter, she would scoop a generous cup of mayonnaise into the bowl, followed by water or coffee. The resulting batter often looked unpromising. It was a thin, slightly greyish mixture that seemed destined for failure. But then, the miracle. In the heat of the oven, the mayonnaise worked its magic. The oil provided a profound richness and moisture, while the lecithin from the egg yolks and the vinegar in the mayonnaise itself reacted with the baking soda to create a surprisingly light and tender crumb. The cake that emerged was rich, dark, and impossibly moist. It was often frosted with a simple chocolate buttercream, also made with frugal ingenuity from cocoa powder, what little butter could be spared, and powdered sugar. And the best part? The children, the very reason for the cake's existence, never suspected a thing. They would devour their slices, completely oblivious that their beloved birthday treat contained the same condiment spread on their lunchtime sandwiches. This cake had another secret advantage: it stayed fresh for days, far longer than traditional recipes, making it perfect for occasions that stretched over a weekend or when ingredients were too scarce to bake more than once. Families guarded this recipe like a state secret, a piece of kitchen witchcraft passed down from mother to daughter. They were amazed that something so unconventional, so seemingly wrong, could taste so wonderfully, traditionally right. The mayonnaise cake wasn't just a dessert, it was a monument to ingenuity, a delicious testament to the old saying that necessity is and always will be the mother of invention. It turned a simple condiment into the centerpiece of a celebration. From a secret ingredient to a humble hero, let's turn to a dessert that transformed simple, everyday staples into pure, unadulterated comfort: the Apple Brown Betty. This dish was the thrifty baker's best friend, a culinary chameleon that existed somewhere in the delicious space between a bread pudding and an apple crisp. Its purpose was twofold: to use up day-old bread that was heading towards staleness, and to transform a basket of inexpensive apples into something that felt truly special. The process began with the bread. Slices of stale bread would be torn or cubed, their dryness making them perfect for absorbing flavor. These breadcrumbs were then tossed with melted butter, a generous amount of brown sugar, and a warming dose of cinnamon until every piece was coated. Next, the apples. Tart-cooking apples, like Granny Smith's, were peeled and sliced, their sharp flavor essential to balance the sweetness of the sugar. Then, in a buttered baking dish, the layering would begin: a layer of the seasoned breadcrumbs, followed by a layer of sliced apples, another layer of breadcrumbs, another of apples, and so on, finishing with a final thick blanket of the breadcrumb mixture. As it baked in the oven, a slow and wonderful transformation took place. The apples would soften and release their juices, which would trickle down, soaking into the lower layers of breadcrumbs. This created a soft, almost custardy interior, a warm, gooey strata of apple and spiced bread. Meanwhile, the top layer, exposed to the direct heat of the oven, would toast to a perfect, golden brown, crispy finish. The aroma that would fill the house during this process was sublime: the scent of warm cinnamon, caramelizing sugar, and sweet, baked apples. It was a smell that promised a perfect, sweet ending to any meal. Families would serve it warm from the oven, spooned into bowls with a pitcher of cold milk for pouring over, or if they were lucky enough to have it, a dollop of thick, fresh cream. Children adored the textural journey of each spoonful, the initial crunch of the topping giving way to the soft, sweet layers beneath. The Apple Brown Betty wasn't fancy. It wasn't complicated. But it was the epitome of comfort food, a dessert that took the plainest of ingredients and, with a little time and heat, elevated them into a spoonful of pure, nostalgic joy. No holiday table in mid-century America was truly complete without a bubbling, creamy, and decidedly beige casserole dish sitting proudly amongst the more glamorous fare. I am, of course, talking about the legendary green bean casserole. Let's be clear, this was not sophisticated cooking. This was not a dish that celebrated the farm-to-table freshness of the green bean. In fact, it was a celebration of the exact opposite, the triumph of the can. The recipe, famously invented by Dorcas Reilly for the Campbell's Soup Company in 1955, was built on 3 pillars of post-war convenience: canned green beans, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a can of French fried onions. The magic was in its almost comical simplicity. You would drain the green beans, mix them in a bowl with the gelatinous, pale cream of mushroom soup, and maybe a splash of milk. This slurry would be poured into a casserole dish, topped with half of the crispy fried onions and baked until it was hot and bubbly. The final flourish was to sprinkle the remaining onions on top for the last few minutes of baking, ensuring maximum crunch. That was it. The entire dish could be assembled hours or even a day ahead of time, a godsend for a host juggling a turkey, mashed potatoes, and a house full of relatives. What it lacked in elegance, it made up for in pure, unadulterated crowd-pleasing power. It was the great culinary unifier. The cream of mushroom soup, with its savoury, umami-rich flavour, masked the sometimes tinny taste of the canned beans, while the crispy, salty, greasy onions on top provided a textural and flavour explosion that elevated the entire concoction. It was the one vegetable dish that even the pickiest of children would not only eat, but actively request. For some families, it was an unbreakable tradition, as essential to Thanksgiving as the turkey itself. For others, it was simply a matter of practicality. But everyone, from the gourmand uncle to the fussy toddler, seemed to agree it just wasn't really a holiday meal without that familiar, comforting, and utterly dependable casserole dish full of this creamy, crunchy, green bean-based comfort. It was the taste of homecoming. From the pragmatic to the sublime, let's consider a dessert that felt impossibly luxurious despite being made from the simplest of ingredients: baked custard with nutmeg. This silky, delicate dessert required only 4 things: eggs, milk, sugar, and a touch of vanilla. Yet, the final product felt like something from a fine dining restaurant. The process was a gentle one, demanding care and a slow hand. A mother would begin by scalding milk in a heavy-bottomed saucepan and heating it just until small bubbles formed around the edge. This step was crucial for creating a smoother texture and preventing the custard from tasting eggy. In a separate bowl, she would beat eggs with sugar and a splash of vanilla extract. Then, the critical step, tempering. The hot milk had to be whisked into the egg mixture very, very slowly, a thin stream at first, to gently raise the temperature of the eggs without scrambling them. This created a smooth, liquid custard base. The mixture was then poured into individual ceramic custard cups or a single large baking dish. To ensure a gentle, even cooking, the dish was placed in a bain-marie, or waterbed, the larger pan filled with hot water that came halfway up the sides of the custard dish. This protected the delicate custard from the direct, harsh heat of the oven, allowing it to set slowly and evenly. It baked until a knife inserted near the center came out clean. The final touch, administered just before baking, was a generous dusting of freshly grated nutmeg over the top. As it cooked, the nutmeg would create aromatic, brown spots on the golden surface. The custard that emerged from the oven was a study in contrasts. It had a slightly firm, taut skin on top, but beneath that surface lay an impossibly creamy, wobbly interior that would melt on the tongue. It could be served warm, straight from the oven, or chilled, when its texture became even more dense and silky. Sometimes, in the summer, it would be served with a few fresh berries. Despite its humble origins, the dessert felt incredibly sophisticated. It could make an ordinary weeknight meal feel special. Children loved its smooth, comforting texture and sweet vanilla flavor, while adults appreciated the delicate, aromatic notes of nutmeg that never overwhelmed the palate. It was simple elegance in a cup. Now for a dish that brought a blast of color and whimsy to tables, especially during the Depression when fresh produce was a luxury: the carrot pineapple gelatin salad. In an era of beige and brown foods, this dish was a shock of vibrant, translucent orange. It was sunshine in a wobbly, jiggly form. Mothers discovered that a simple packet of orange-flavored gelatin could be a vehicle for all sorts of things. The process was simple: dissolve the gelatin powder in boiling water, then stir in a can of crushed pineapple, making sure to include all of its sweet juice, and a cup of finely grated raw carrots. The genius of this dish was its ability to stretch ingredients and create something festive from very little. Some families, when the budget allowed, would elevate it further by adding chopped walnuts for crunch or shredded coconut for a touch of the exotic. The mixture was then poured into a decorative mold, often a ring mold or some other fluted, fancy shapey, and chilled in the isobox until firm. The grand unveiling, when the mold was inverted onto a platter of lettuce leaves, was a moment of minor domestic theatre. The result was a sweet, fruity side dish that, miraculously, children actually wanted to eat. It was a Trojan horse for vegetables. The combination of textures was what made every bite so interesting. The smooth, cool gelatin, the tender shreds of carrot, and the chewy, fibrous chunks of pineapple. It was a staple at holiday meals, church potlucks, and special Sunday dinners. Its bright, cheerful colour looked incredibly festive on the table, and its sweet flavour provided a delightful contrast to savoury main dishes like baked ham or roasted chicken. For mothers, it was a triple win. It could be made well ahead of time, freeing up the stove on a busy day. It used affordable pantry staples, and it got their children to eat carrots without a single complaint. Let's move from the sweet to the savoury and explore a pantry staple that became the foundation for countless filling family meals: the salmon and potato bake. Canned salmon, with its rich pink colour and distinctive flavour, was an affordable and shelf-stable protein that mothers relied on to feed their growing families. This casserole was a one-dish wonder, a complete meal that combined flaked salmon with layers of thinly sliced potatoes, onions, and a simple, creamy white sauce all baked together in a buttered dish. The white sauce, or bechamel, was the heart of the dish, a skill every resourceful cook had mastered. It was made from a simple rux of butter and flour, with milk whisked in until it became a smooth, thick sauce, seasoned with just salt and pepper. This creamy binder enveloped all the other ingredients. To make the meal even more substantial, some families would add chopped hard-boiled eggs or a handful of peas, further stretching the precious protein. The casserole would be baked until the potatoes were fork tender and the top was a beautiful, bubbly golden brown. Each serving was a model of nutritional efficiency: protein and healthy omega-3 fats from the salmon, carbohydrates from the potatoes, and calcium from the milk in the sauce. It was typically served with a simple green vegetable, like string beans, or just a few slices of fresh bread for sopping up the sauce. For many children, this meal came with a small, built-in adventure, picking through the flaked salmon to find the small, edible bones. The bones were so soft from the canning process that they would crumble between your fingers, providing a surprising and welcome source of calcium. This casserole was also incredibly forgiving. If unexpected guests arrived for dinner, a cook could easily stretch the dish by adding another layer of potatoes and a bit more milk to the sauce. The combination of flavors was mild enough to appeal to children, yet hearty and satisfying enough for a working adult after a long day. It was humble, reliable, and deeply nourishing. When ground beef became a luxury, a creative cook couldn't just use less, she had to find a way to make less feel like more. This led to an ingenious twist on an American classic, the rolled oats meatloaf. The secret ingredient that transformed this dish was breakfast cereal. Rolled oats, typically reserved for morning porridge, became the perfect extender for expensive ground beef. The oats were a culinary miracle worker. During cooking, they absorbed the moisture and rendering fat from the meat, which prevented the meatloaf from becoming dry and crumbly. The result was a loaf with a remarkably tender, moist texture, while the oats themselves added a subtle, nutty flavour that complemented the beef. The process was straightforward. A mother would mix a pound of ground beef with a cup or more of uncooked rolled oats, a beaten egg to bind it all together, some finely chopped onion for flavour, and her preferred seasonings. This mixture was then shaped into a familiar loaf and baked until golden and cooked through. The oats not only added moisture and flavour, they also provided bulk, effectively stretching a single pound of meat to feed a larger family. Many cooks would add a signature glaze to the top during the last 20 minutes of baking. A simple smear of ketchup would caramelize into a tangy crust, while a mixture of brown sugar and mustard created a sweet and savoury finish. The leftovers were almost as good as the main event, making for excellent cold meatloaf sandwiches the next day, tucked between 2 slices of white bread with a little mayonnaise. The children, happily eating their favourite dinner, never suspected they were consuming a significant amount of heart-healthy breakfast cereal. The adults, meanwhile, appreciated a dish that was not only filling and economical but also quietly nutritious. The oats added valuable fibre and complex carbohydrates to a protein-heavy meal. This was a make-ahead marvel, perfect for busy families, and a single slice provided a complete, satisfying portion of protein and grains. It was a testament to the quiet brilliance of home cooks who knew how to make a little go a very long way. Next, a meal that represents the absolute bedrock of pantry staple cuisine, a combination that required no cooking, no preparation, and no ceremony: canned Vienna sausages with crackers. These small, pale sausages, packed neatly in a tin filled with a savoury broth, were a fixture in the mid-century American pantry. They were an emergency meal, a quick snack, a reliable source of protein when fresh meat was unavailable or unaffordable. In their purest form, a mother would simply pry open the can and serve the sausages cold, straight from their broth, alongside a sleeve of saltine crackers. Sometimes, a few pickles or a slice of cheese might join the plate if they were on hand. But their versatility didn't end there. They could be sliced and scrambled into eggs for a quick, protein-packed breakfast. They could be lightly fried in a pan until their skins crisped up, giving them a bit more texture and flavor. Children, for some reason, often loved them. Perhaps it was their salty, smoky flavor, or the fun of eating these tiny, finger-sized sausages that felt like a fancy appetizer. Despite their diminutive size, these sausages were surprisingly filling, and the plain, salty crackers provided the necessary carbohydrate ballast. This combination became the go-to food for situations where convenience was paramount. Families took them on picnics and road trips, because they required no refrigeration. During power outages or other emergencies, a can of Wiener sausages and a box of crackers was a reliable source of nutrition that could be eaten by candlelight. For many who grew up in that era, this simple, unglamorous meal became a peculiar form of comfort food, fondly remembered in adulthood. It wasn't about culinary excellence, it was about filling hungry stomachs and creating memories in times when families had to make do and make good with whatever was readily available. On a hot summer day, when the thought of turning on the stove was unbearable, a different kind of ingenuity was required. This led to a refreshing, elegant, and entirely no-cook meal, tuna stuffed tomatoes. The star of this dish was a large, ripe, beefsteak tomato, which became an edible, biodegradable bowl. A cook would take a firm, ripe tomato, slice off the top, and carefully scoop out the seeds and pulp with a spoon. This pulp wasn't discarded. The waste not, want not principle demanded it be saved for a sauce or soup later on. The hollowed-out tomato shells were then ready for their filling. The filling was a classic, creamy tuna salad. A can of tuna would be drained and flaked, then mixed with mayonnaise, finely chopped celery for a fresh, watery crunch, and often chopped hard-boiled eggs to add more substance and richness. Depending on the family's preference, a spoonful of sweet pickle relish might be added for a tangy kick, or some minced onion for a sharp bite. These filled tomato shells were then chilled thoroughly in the isobox. The final presentation was simple but beautiful. Each stuffed tomato was placed on a crisp leaf of iceberg lettuce, creating a complete, individual portion that felt surprisingly elegant. The appeal was multifaceted. The combination of the cool, creamy, savory filling with the juicy, slightly acidic tomato was the perfect antidote to a sweltering summer afternoon. Children enjoyed the novelty of the dish, the fun of eating the bowl along with its contents. Adults appreciated the fresh, light flavors and the fact that a satisfying, nutritious meal could be put on the table without generating any heat in the kitchen. It was another example of a perfectly balanced meal, protein from the tuna and eggs, vitamins and fiber from the tomato and celery, and healthy fats from the mayonnaise. Each personalized tomato portion made the meal feel intentional and special, a small, edible work of art. Let's venture back to the oven for a baked good that was more than a cookie, but not quite a pie. The deceptive and delightful raisin-filled cookies. These weren't your average drop cookies. They were small, handheld pies, a clever construction that hid a sweet, jammy secret inside. A mother would start by making a simple, sweet cookie dough, similar to a sugar cookie dough but perhaps a bit sturdier. This dough would be rolled out thin and cut into circles using the rim of a glass or a biscuit cutter. The filling was the star. Plump raisins were cooked down on the stovetop with a little water, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg until they broke down and formed a thick, dark, fragrant paste. A spoonful of this rich raisin mixture was placed in the center of half the dough circles. Then, another circle of dough was placed on top, like a lid on a tiny pie. The edges were carefully crimped together with the tines of a fork, sealing the precious filling inside. A small slit was often cut in the top to allow steam to escape during baking. Baked until golden brown, they emerged from the oven looking like plain, albeit thick, sugar cookies. The true magic was in the first bite. The crisp cookie exterior gave way to a burst of warm, gooey, intensely sweet raisin filling. It was a wonderful surprise, a hidden treasure of flavor and texture. Families often made these for special occasions, when they wanted something a bit more elaborate and festive than a simple cookie, but couldn't afford more expensive fillings like nuts or chocolate. The cookies also kept remarkably well in a covered tin, making them perfect for packing in lunches or as a satisfying afternoon snack with a glass of milk. The satisfying contrast between the crunchy cookie and the soft, jammy interior made these treats uniquely memorable, a taste of special occasion baking that lingered long after childhood had ended. In the days before universal refrigeration and strict best-by dates, a resourceful cook knew that milk didn't just go from fresh to spoiled. There was a magical, useful stage in between. This brings us to the tangy, fluffy wonder of sour milk biscuits, when milk was just beginning to turn, developing a slight, sour tang, but before it had truly spoiled, it was considered a culinary asset. The secret was in the acid. The lactic acid in the soured milk would react powerfully with baking soda, creating an extra burst of carbon dioxide gas. This reaction produced an incredible amount of lift, resulting in biscuits that were higher, fluffier, and more tender than any made with fresh milk. A mother, noticing the telltale sour smell from the milk bottle, would seize the opportunity. She'd mix flour, baking soda, salt, and a fate, usually lard for the flakiest texture, or butter for flavor, cutting the fat into the flour until it resembled coarse crumbs. Then, she would pour in the sour milk, stirring just until the dough came together. Over-mixing was the enemy of a tender biscuit. The slightly sticky dough would be turned out onto a floured board, gently kneaded a few times, then rolled or patted out and cut into rounds with a biscuit cutter or the rim of a drinking glass. Baked in a hot oven, they would puff up, dramatically, their tops turning a beautiful golden brown. The slight tang from the sour milk wasn't a flaw, it was a feature, creating a complex, almost cheesy flavor that paired perfectly with a slab of butter, a spoonful of homemade jam, or a drizzle of honey. Families would eat these biscuits hot from the oven for breakfast, serve them alongside fried chicken for dinner, or enjoy them as a simple snack with coffee. The children, devouring the fluffy, delicious biscuits, were none the wiser that they were made from milk that was technically past its prime. This recipe was the epitome of kitchen wisdom, a perfect example of turning potential garbage into golden, delicious treasures. Next, a dish that often divided households into two distinct camps, the lovers and the haters, but was nonetheless a pantry staple: stewed prunes. Dried prunes, those wrinkled, dark, and slightly sticky fruits, were an economical and long-lasting source of sweetness and nutrients. Through the simple process of slow, gentle cooking, they were transformed into a sweet, syrupy, and surprisingly sophisticated side dish. The cook would start by soaking the dried prunes overnight in water, which would begin the process of rehydrating them. The next day, they would be simmered gently on the stovetop with a bit of sugar, a squeeze of lemon juice to brighten the flavor, and sometimes a cinnamon stick for warmth. They cooked until they were plump, tender, and almost bursting from their skins. The cooking liquid would reduce into a light, beautiful, deep purple syrup that enhanced the natural, earthy sweetness of the fruit. Stewed prunes were surprisingly versatile. They were served for breakfast alongside a bowl of oatmeal or a stack of pancakes. They appeared as a side dish with savory meats, their rich sweetness providing a perfect counterpoint to salty pork or ham. Or they could be a simple dessert on their own, perhaps topped with a spoonful of cream. Nutritionally, they were an powerhouse, providing important fiber, potassium, and other vitamins. Adults, in particular, appreciated their well-known digestive benefits and the fact that they could be made in a large batch and stored in the refrigerator for days. While some children balked at their appearance and unique texture, others loved their intense sweetness. The deep, wine-like flavor of the cooked prunes provided a surprisingly sophisticated taste that could elevate a simple meal into something that felt a bit more special. Let's talk about a misunderstood ingredient, a Native American corn preparation that became a staple side dish in many southern and midwestern households: hominy with butter and salt. Hominy is not just corn. It's corn that has undergone an ancient process called nixtamalization. Dried corn kernels are soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, traditionally wood ash lye, which loosens the tough outer hull and, more importantly, chemically changes the corn. This process unlocks niacin and other amino acids, making the corn far more nutritious and digestible. The result is large, puffy, soft white kernels with a unique, satisfyingly chewy texture and a distinct corn-like flavor that is different from sweet corn. For many families, hominy came from a can. A mother would simply open the can, drain the liquid, and heat the kernels in a saucepan. The classic preparation was the simplest: stir in a generous pat of butter until it melted and coated every kernel, then season generously with salt and pepper. Some families preferred to take it a step further, frying the hominy in a skillet until the edges were lightly browned and crispy, while others liked it served soft and creamy. Its mild, slightly earthy corn flavor made it a perfect neutral base, a starky sidekick that paired wonderfully with strongly flavored main dishes. It was the perfect companion for salty country ham, spicy sausage or crispy fried chicken. Children were often initially puzzled by its unusual, slightly puffy texture, but most grew to love its corny sweetness and satisfying chew. The dish was incredibly filling and inexpensive, providing a hearty dose of carbohydrates and some protein. Hominy was also a valuable extender, capable of stretching other ingredients in casseroles or soups, making it a crucial tool for feeding large families on tight budgets. Each kernel was a little burst of authentic corn flavor, a taste that connected families to their deep agricultural roots. Now, we venture into territory that might make the modern palate a bit squeamish, but was a beloved delicacy for many: pickled pig's feet. This was a preserved meat that required patience and a strong stomach, but it provided a source of protein that could last for weeks, even months, without any refrigeration. The process began at the butcher's. Pig's feet would be meticulously cleaned and often split, then packed tightly into large glass jars. They were submerged in a brine of sharp vinegar, salt, and a medley of pickling spices, which could include peppercorns, cloves, allspice, and bay leaves. Sometimes, sliced onions or garlic cloves were added for extra flavor. The jars were then sealed and left to cure for weeks. During this time, the magic of preservation took place. The vinegar and salt solution not only protected the meat from spoilage, but also broke down the tough connective tissues. The meat became incredibly tender and tangy, and the abundant collagen in the feet transformed into a rich, gelatinous texture that was the hallmark of the dish. Families would serve them cold, straight from the jar, as an appetizer or a snack, often alongside crackers and a cold beer. They could also be chopped up and added to salads for a surprising burst of tangy flavor and unctuous texture. Children were often a mix of curious and hesitant, daring each other to try a bite. Adults, however, often appreciated both the intense, sharp flavor that cut through the rich fattiness and the profound economy of using a part of the animal that might otherwise be discarded. Nutritionally, the pickled feet provided a significant amount of collagen and protein, and the ancient preservation method meant they were a reliable food source, independent of electricity or iceboxes. Whether you loved them or loathed them, each bite delivered an unforgettable, intense flavor and a satisfyingly chewy, gelatinous mouthfeel that made them a truly memorable part of the culinary landscape. Let's turn to a dish designed to make a sometimes bitter vegetable not just palatable, but downright delicious: creamed spinach on toast. Fresh spinach, with its earthy, iron-rich flavor, was transformed into a creamy, comforting dish that could win over even the most stubborn of children. A mother would start by cooking a large bunch of fresh spinach until it was completely wilted, then squeeze out as much of the excess water as possible. This concentrated the flavor and prevented the final dish from being watery. The wilted spinach was then chopped finely and folded into a rich, classic white sauce that same versatile bechamel made from butter, flour, and milk. The mixture was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and often a delicate grating of nutmeg, whose aromatic warmth beautifully complements spinach. This creamy, green concoction was then served hot, ladled generously over slices of toasted bread. The toast wasn't just a vehicle, it was an essential component. The combination of the earthy spinach, the rich and creamy sauce, and the crispy, crunchy toast created a perfect textural symphony in every single bite. This was often served as a light lunch or a simple supper when meat wasn't on the menu, or as a hearty side dish with simple proteins like a broiled fish fillet. The genius of the dish was how the creamy, fatty sauce mellowed the sometimes bitter notes of the spinach, making it incredibly appealing to young taste buds. At the same time, the toast provided the substance and carbohydrates needed to make it feel like a complete meal. Adults appreciated it as a clever and delicious way to get iron-rich vegetables into their children's diets. Each serving felt substantial, comforting, and satisfying, proving that with a little thoughtful preparation, vegetables could be just as filling and desirable as meat. In the spirit of nose-to-tail eating, long before it became a trendy culinary movement, resourceful cooks knew that the most flavorful and economical cuts of meat were often the ones others overlooked. This brings us to the deeply savory and nutritious beef heart stew. This organ meat, an economical cut, required a long, slow cooking process to become tender, but the results were worth every minute. The flavor was intensely beefy, and the nutrition was off the charts. A mother would begin by carefully trimming the beef heart, removing any tough outer membranes or gristle. The muscle itself would then be cut into 1-inch chunks and browned in a pot with onions, creating a flavorful base. Then came the long simmer. The browned meat was covered with water or broth and left to cook for hours, along with hearty root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and celery, until everything in the pot was completely fork tender. The heart muscle being a hard-working organ, had a slightly different, denser texture than regular stew beef, but its flavour was richer, deeper, and more profoundly beefy. This hearty stew was almost always served with fresh bread or fluffy biscuits on the side, essential for soaking up every last drop of the flavourful, rich broth. Children might have been initially hesitant at the thought of eating an organ, but the familiar, comforting format of a stew with its familiar vegetables and savoury gravy made it much more acceptable. The dish was a nutritional powerhouse, packed with iron, a full spectrum of B vitamins, and complete protein, all for a fraction of the cost of premium cuts like chuck or sirloin. Each warm bowl delivered a stick to your ribs, nourishment that kept families full, warm, and healthy through long, hard-working days. From the rustic to the refined, let's look at an elegant side dish that could elevate humble celery into something special enough for a holiday table: creamed celery casserole. Celery, so often relegated to a supporting role as an aromatic in soups or a crunchy vehicle for dip, took centre stage in this dish. A mother would slice fresh celery stalks and cook them in boiling, salted water until they were just tender crisp. They were then drained and layered in a buttered casserole dish. The celery was then enrobed in a rich cream sauce, often a bechamel made with butter, flour, and milk, perhaps enriched with a splash of chicken broth for a more savoury depth. The crowning glory was the topping, a generous layer of buttered breadcrumbs, which would bake into a golden, crunchy crust. The dish would be baked until the sauce was hot and bubbly, and the top was a beautiful, burnished gold. The flavour combination was surprisingly sophisticated. The mild, fresh, slightly vegetal flavour of the celery paired beautifully with the richness of the cream sauce, while the crunchy breadcrumb topping added a much-needed textural interest. Families would serve this alongside roasted meats like turkey or prime rib, or as part of an elaborate holiday spread. It had an air of elegance about it. Children, who might turn up their noses at raw celery, were often won over by the creamy sauce and crunchy topping. Adults enjoyed the delicate, sophisticated flavours, and for the host, it was a practical choice. The casserole could be fully assembled ahead of time and simply baked off when needed, a valuable trick for entertaining. Each serving provided a delicious dose of vegetables in a format that felt like pure comfort food, making healthy eating feel downright indulgent. Next, a sweet and savoury side dish that combined some of the simplest pantry ingredients into something unexpectedly delicious and comforting: rice and raisin casserole. This dish existed in the delightful borderlands between a side dish and a dessert. A cook would start with a base of simple white rice, cooked until tender and fluffy. This cooked rice was then mixed in a bowl with a generous handful of sweet raisins, a few pats of melted butter, and sometimes, for extra texture and richness, chopped nuts like pecans or shredded coconut. Some families would add a touch of cinnamon or a splash of vanilla extract to the mixture for extra aromatic warmth. This sweet and savoury rice mixture was then transferred to a buttered casserole dish, spread into an even layer, and baked until it was heated through and the top was lightly golden. The result was a comforting, warm dish that could pair surprisingly well with both sweet and savoury main courses. The combination of the fluffy, neutral rice, the chewy bursts of sweetness from the raisins, and the richness of the butter was incredibly satisfying. Children loved hunting for the sweet raisins scattered throughout the rice, while adults appreciated the interesting and unusual flavour combination. It was a filling and highly economical dish, using affordable rice to stretch other, more expensive ingredients. It was a fantastic accompaniment to salty meats like baked ham, or with roasted chicken or pork, providing a starchy carbohydrate and a natural sweetness that complemented the richness of the meat. Each spoonful delivered familiar, comforting flavours that often reminded families of special occasions and abundant holiday tables. From the heart of Pennsylvania, Dutch country, comes a breakfast specialty born from the philosophy of using every single part of the pig: fried cornmeal scrapple. This was the ultimate expression of waste not, want not. Butchers and home cooks would take the pork scraps and bones left over after the prime cuts were removed and simmer them for hours, until every last bit of meat fell off the bone. The resulting rich broth was then strained and mixed with cornmeal and sometimes buckwheat flour, creating a thick, porridge-like mush. This mixture was heavily seasoned with aromatic sage, black pepper and other spices, then poured into loaf pans and chilled until it became completely firm. When it was time for breakfast, the firm scrapple loaf was sliced thick, about a half-inch, and then fried in a hot skillet with a bit of lard or oil. The goal was to achieve a deep, dark, shatteringly crispy crust on the outside, while the inside remained soft, creamy, and steamy. The combination of the rich pork flavour, the gritty texture of the cornmeal, and the fragrant, savoury spices created a unique and beloved breakfast meat that was both incredibly economical and deeply satisfying. Families would serve thick slices of fried scrapple alongside eggs, pancakes or toast, often with a drizzle of maple syrup or apple butter. It was a hearty, protein-packed start to the day. Children loved the crispy exterior, while adults appreciated the complex, savory flavors and the knowledge that they were partaking in a tradition of resourceful thrift. Each substantial slice provided the kind of stick-to-your-ribs nutrition that could sustain a family through a long morning of hard farm work. Now for a dessert that sounds like a culinary prank, but was a very real and surprisingly delicious pie born from ingenuity and scarcity, the navy bean pie. This dessert is a testament to the creative power of a cook faced with a challenge. In times or places where expensive pie fillings like pecans or even apples were unavailable, humble navy beans stepped in to take their place. A mother would cook dried navy beans until they were completely tender and soft, then drain them and mash them until they were perfectly smooth, like a puree. This neutral, starchy bean base was then mixed with the standard ingredients for a custard pie: eggs, milk, often evaporated milk for richness, sugar, and warm spices like vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg. This smooth, pale mixture was poured into an unbaked pie crust and baked until the custard was set. The result was a pie with a creamy, dense, custard-like filling with a unique, smooth texture. The beans themselves provided a natural thickness and a very subtle, almost undetectable earthy flavor, while also adding a surprising amount of protein and fiber to what was, for all intents and purposes, a dessert. Families would serve these pies when they craved something sweet, but needed to be frugal. The true fun of the navy bean pie was its element of surprise. Its pale color and smooth texture completely disguised its bean-based origins, often stumping guests who couldn't quite identify the secret ingredient. Children, unaware of the secret, simply enjoyed the sweet, custard-like flavor. Adults appreciated its nutritional value and its incredible economy. Each slice was an unusual, but deeply satisfying end to a simple meal, a perfect example of how creativity could transform even the most unlikely of ingredients into a memorable and beloved dessert. Let's dig up a root vegetable that has largely fallen out of fashion, but once starred in a delicious and unusual dish: salsify fritters. Salsify, a long, thin, white root vegetable, earned the nickname oyster plant because of its subtle, delicate flavor that, when cooked, is vaguely reminiscent of oysters or seafood. To make these golden fritters, a cook would first have to scrub and peel the long, pale roots, a slightly tedious task. The salsify was then grated and mixed with beaten eggs, a bit of flour to act as a binder, and seasonings to create a thick batter. Spoonfuls of this unique batter were then dropped into a skillet of hot oil and fried until they were golden brown and crispy on all sides. The interior of the fritter remained tender, steamy, and slightly sweet, while the exterior developed a deeply satisfying crunch. Families would serve these fritters as a novel side dish with roasted meats, or as a light meal on their own with a simple salad. The unusual, hard-to-place flavor intrigued adults, while children were simply drawn to the crispy texture and fun, irregular shapes. Salsify was a valuable crop because it grew easily in home gardens and, being a root vegetable, stored exceptionally well in root cellars through the winter. This made it a vital source of vegetables when fresh produce was scarce and expensive. Each fritter was a little package of unique flavors and textures that could make an ordinary meal feel special, showcasing how a creative cook could take a common garden vegetable and make it seem almost exotic. No survey of old-fashioned treats would be complete without a candy that was as much an activity as it was a confection: molasses taffy. This was a candy that required patience, strong arms, and teamwork, but it created sweet, lasting memories right alongside the sweet treats. A mother would begin by boiling a mixture of dark molasses, sugar, and butter in a heavy pot, carefully monitoring the temperature with a candy thermometer or the old-fashioned cold water test. Once it reached the hardball stage, the dark, bubbling, volcanic liquid was poured onto large, buttered platters to cool. This was where the fun began. Once the mass of candy was cool enough to handle, but still warm and pliable, family members would butter their hands and take turns pulling the taffy. Two people would stretch the warm, heavy rope of candy between them, folding it back on itself and stretching it again, over and over. This pulling process was essential. It incorporated tiny air bubbles into the candy, which changed its color from a dark brown to a light, satiny tan, and transformed its texture from glass-hard to delightfully tender and chewy. The kitchen would be filled with laughter and groans as arms grew tired. The finished, aerated taffy was then stretched into a long, thin rope, cut into bite-sized pieces with buttered scissors, and wrapped individually in wax paper for storage. Children absolutely loved participating in the pulling, feeling like they were part of a magical, delicious science experiment. The deep, Rich, slightly bitter flavor of the molasses was intense and deeply satisfying. Each piece of taffy wasn't just sugar, it represented family cooperation, old-fashioned fun, and a tradition that lasted far beyond the candy itself. As we move from the home kitchen to the open range, the tools and techniques change, but the desire for a comforting meal remains the same. Every trail cook worth his salt knew that a good dessert could soothe tired bodies and lift weary spirits. The crown jewel of campfire cuisine was the Dutch oven peach cobbler. This wasn't just a dessert, it was an event, a bubbling cauldron of sweetness cooked right in the heart of the campfire. The secret wasn't just in the sweet peaches or the fluffy biscuit topping, it was in the mastery of the cast iron Dutch oven. Cowboys would create a perfect, even heat by arranging a bed of hot coals from the fire, setting the Dutch oven on top, and then carefully piling more hot coals onto the flat, flanged lid. This ingenious setup created a portable, 360-degree oven that could rival anything back home. The peaches themselves were often dried, a lightweight and non-perishable necessity for the trail. They would be reconstituted with precious water, slowly releasing their sweetness as they simmered in the bottom of the pot. The biscuit dough, a simple mix of flour, baking powder and fat, was dropped in spoonfuls over the hot fruit. With the lid on, and the coals arranged, the magic would begin. The peaches would bubble into a thick, syrupy sauce while the biscuit dough, heated from above and below, would bake into a golden, fluffy crust. The aroma that drifted from that pot could draw riders in from miles away, a sweet promise of comfort at the end of a long day's ride. Many a friendship was forged over a shared, tin plate of this heavenly treat. Old-timers had a method for testing the heat that required no thermometer, just pure experience. They would hold a hand about 5 inches above the coals on the lid. If they could count to 8 before the heat forced them to pull away, the temperature was perfect for baking. It was an ancient, intuitive technique, a piece of wisdom passed down through generations of outdoor cooks who knew how to create a feast from fire and iron. From the campfire to the ceremonial circle, we encounter a food that is more than sustenance, it is a sacred tradition. Wajapi, a sacred berry sauce, holds the title as one of the most important foods in Lakota culture. To call wajapi a sauce or a pudding, as its Lakota name translates, is to do it a grave injustice. This is liquid tradition, a culinary prayer passed down through countless generations of native mothers and grandmothers. Making wajapi is an act of patience and profound respect for the ingredients provided by the earth. It begins with whatever berries nature provides in abundance. Tart chokecherries, wild blueberries or strawberries are traditional favorites. The berries are crushed and mixed with water, then cooked very slowly over low heat until they break down and release their own natural sugars and pectin. Some modern variations might add a touch of honey or maple syrup for sweetness, but traditional wajapi relies entirely on the inherent sweetness of the fruit itself. The magic is in that slow, gentle cooking process. As the berries collapse and their juices thicken, they create a rich, thick, deep purple sauce that beautifully coats the back of a spoon. Wajapi is rarely eaten alone. It is a companion, a sacred condiment served alongside crispy fried bread, wild game, or even modern dishes like pancakes. For the Lakota people and other Plains tribes, wajapi is an essential element of ceremonies, powwows, and community gatherings. The act of making and sharing this food is an act of cultural preservation, a way of strengthening community bonds and honoring the gifts of the land. Before commercial pancake mixes lined grocery store shelves, a prospector's most valuable possession wasn't his pickaxe or his gold pan, it was his sawdo starter. The sawdo flapjacks made from this living culture fueled gold miners, trappers and settlers, providing the raw energy needed for back-breaking labor in the most unforgiving of conditions. The starter itself was treated less like an ingredient and more like a living entity, a member of the family. It was fed, nurtured, and protected from the elements with an almost religious devotion. A portion of the bubbling, yeasty starter would be mixed with flour and water to create a batter that would sit overnight, foaming and growing as the wild yeast and bacteria worked their magic. The result was a pancake with a distinctive, tangy, sour bite that paired perfectly with the dark sweetness of molasses or a drizzle of wild honey. These were not the light, fluffy, buttermilk pancakes of today. They were dense, substantial, and designed to stick to your ribs when the next meal might be hours or even days away. A smart cook would keep his crock of starter close to his body on cold nights, tucked inside his bedroll to ensure the living culture survived the freezing temperatures, ready to provide another day's worth of sustenance. These starters, carried across the continent, developed unique characteristics based on the wild yeasts in their local environment. Miners would carry their precious culture in small crocks, sometimes sharing a portion with a fellow prospector who had lost his own to an accident or neglect. A good, strong starter was often considered more valuable than a pouch of gold dust, because it represented the crucial difference between sustenance and starvation in remote camps where supply wagons were a rare and unreliable sight. If Native American cultures had invented the modern protein bar, pemmican would be their undisputed masterpiece. This incredibly dense, concentrated superfood could keep warriors, hunters, and travelers alive and energized for months on the trail. The name itself comes from the Cree word pimmican, which roughly means manufactured grease, though that clinical description hardly captures its vital importance. Creating pemmican is a laborious, multi-step process. It begins with very lean meat, traditionally from buffalo, but also deer or elk. The meat is cut into thin strips and slowly dried over a low fire or in the hot sun until it is completely dehydrated and brittle. Then comes the arduous grinding process, where the dried meat is pounded into a fine powder, using stones. This meat powder is then mixed in roughly equal parts with rendered fat or tallow. To this base, dried and crushed berries, like cranberries or chokecherries, were often added for extra flavor, vitamins, and preservative qualities. The final product is a dense, dark, heavy bar or cake that is almost indestructible, capable of lasting for years without refrigeration. A single, small piece of pemmican is so calorically and nutritionally dense that it could sustain a person through an entire day of hard travel. Modern hikers and survivalists have rediscovered pemmican for this very reason. It delivers complete, balanced nutrition in a compact, stable form. The fat provides slow burning, steady energy, the protein rebuilds muscle, and the berries add crucial vitamins that help to prevent diseases like scurvy. It was, and is, the ultimate survival food. No campfire scene is complete without the iconic image of a large, black pot of beans simmering over the coals. Cowboy beans with salt pork were the absolute backbone of frontier cuisine. This wasn't just a side dish, it was often the entire meal, a hearty, filling stew stretched with whatever vegetables could be foraged and seasoned with the smoky, salty fat from a piece of salt pork that might have travelled for thousands of miles in a saddlebag. The process was low and slow. The beans, usually pinto or navy beans, would cook for an entire day, gently bubbling away while the cowboys worked the herd. This long cooking time allowed them to become incredibly tender, absorbing the rich, smoky flavors of the pork and the wood smoke from the fire. A good camp cook, or cookie, would often start the beans at dawn, returning to a pot of hearty sustenance that could feed a crew of a dozen hungry men. The salt pork was the key. It provided not only a deep, savory flavor, but also precious fat and calories, which were essential for survival on the long, arduous cattle drives. Cookie would often enhance the pot with whatever he could find along the trail, wild onions, prairie turnips, or chilies. As the beans cooked, they would break down slightly, creating their own thick, rich sauce from the rendered pork fat and the natural starches released from the beans themselves. A good pot of cowboy beans was a communal treasure, easily stretched to feed unexpected visitors, making it the perfect, adaptable dish for the unpredictable life of the American frontier. The spirit of pemmican lives on. Tanka bars represent the modern, brilliant evolution of this ancient food, created by Native American entrepreneur Mark Tilson on the Pine Ridge Reservation. These bars are a bridge between past and present, combining traditional, grass-fed buffalo meat with tart cranberries and natural seasonings, bringing an ancient form of nutrition into the 21st century marketplace. The name Tanka means great or large in the Lakota language, and it reflects the big impact these small bars are having, not just on nutrition, but on Native American economic development. Unlike the vast majority of mass-produced energy bars, which are often filled with processed sugars and artificial ingredients, Tanka bars adhere to the original principles of the pemmican. Buffalo meat provides the clean protein base, while cranberries add natural sweetness, antioxidants, and that traditional flavor. The bars contain no artificial preservatives, yet they stay fresh for months, because the traditional methods of drying the meat and rendering the fat naturally prevent spoilage. But what makes Tanka bars truly special goes far beyond their nutritional profile. They represent a powerful move towards economic sovereignty for Native American communities. The buffalo meat is sourced from native-owned ranches, helping to restore the buffalo to its central place in Plains culture and economy. The profits from the company are funneled back into supporting tribal economic development. When you eat a Tanka bar, you aren't just getting a healthy snack. You are participating in a story of cultural revival, supporting Native American communities who are working to rebuild their traditional food systems while creating successful, modern businesses. Let's return to a story of pure, unadulterated resourcefulness. Depression-era drifters, often called hobos, created an ingenious cooking method out of sheer necessity, one that required no pots, no pans, and no dishes. They were called hobo packets. This was the ultimate one-pot meal, except there was no pot. A hobo would take whatever ingredients he could find or was given a potato, an onion, a carrot, maybe a few scraps of meat and wrap them tightly in layers of newspaper or a piece of cloth. This packet was then buried directly in the hot coals of a campfire. The beauty of the hobo packet was its incredible versatility and efficiency. Inside the wrapping, the ingredients would steam in their own juices, protected from the ash and dirt of the fire. All the flavors would meld together, creating a complete, savory meal that was both filling and surprisingly flavorful. This method was perfect for men who carried everything they owned on their backs. It created no dishes to wash and no mess to clean up. Hobo camps often had a communal fire, and men would mark their individual packets with a uniquely shaped stick or a specific arrangement of stones, creating a primitive but highly effective cooking system that could feed an entire camp without a single piece of kitchen equipment. Railroad workers and migrant laborers perfected this technique over time, learning from experience exactly how long to cook different combinations. A packet containing just vegetables might need 30 minutes, while one with a tough piece of meat might take over an hour. The outer wrapping would char and blacken, but the food inside would emerge perfectly steamed, tender, and infused with a subtle, smoky flavor that no modern cooking method can truly replicate. The three sisters are not siblings in a family. They are corn, beans, and squash, the three crops that formed the foundation of Native American agriculture for over 1,000 years. These three crops were planted together in the same fields in a brilliant system of companion planting, where each plant helped the others to survive and thrive. The tall, strong corn stalks provided a natural trellis for the bean vines to climb. The beans, in turn, fixed nitrogen in the soil, providing essential nutrients for the hungry corn and squash. And the large, sprawling leaves of the squash plant created a living mulch, shading the soil to retain moisture and prevent weeds. Making Three Sisters Stew is a celebration of this ancient agricultural partnership, bringing the sisters back together in a single, nourishing pot. The process typically starts by cooking dried beans until they are tender, as they take the longest time. Then, fresh or dried corn kernels are added, followed by hearty chunks of winter squash, like butternut or a corn squash. Some tribal variations include wild game like venison or rabbit, while others keep the stew completely plant-based. The true magic of Three Sisters Stew lies in its perfect, complementary nutrition. Corn and beans, when eaten together, form a complete protein, providing all the essential amino acids that humans need to thrive. The squash adds a wealth of vitamins, especially A and C, along with healthy carbohydrates. Native American communities subsisted on variations of this hearty stew throughout the harsh winter months, proving that a plant-based diet could sustain entire civilizations long before modern vegetarianism became a trend. It is a dish that tells a story of ecological wisdom, sustainability, and community. When Scottish fur traders brought their simple, unleavened bread to the American frontier, it was quickly adopted and adapted, becoming a staple for anyone who needed fresh bread without access to an oven. This was bannock bread. The beauty of bannock was its profound simplicity. It required only 4 ingredients that could be easily carried on the trail: flour, salt, baking powder for leavening, and water. These could be transformed into hot, fresh bread with nothing more than a campfire and a flat stone or a stick. The duff, a simple, stiff mixture, would often be wrapped around a green, freshly cut stick and held over the hot coals of a fire. It had to be rotated, slowly and patiently, to ensure it cooked evenly all the way through without burning. The result was a dense, chewy bread with a wonderfully smoky flavor from the fire. It was the perfect accompaniment to a bowl of stew or a piece of roasted meat. Native American tribes quickly adopted this simple technique, often personalizing it by adding their own local ingredients, like crushed wild berries or nuts, directly into the dough. The bread could be eaten hot, right off the stick, or cooled and packed to be carried as trail food for the next day. It was a simple, reliable source of carbohydrates, a taste of comfort and home in the wild. Long before bone broth became a trendy, expensive health food sold in boutique shops, Native American tribes were simmering bison bones, for days on end to extract every last bit of nutrition from these magnificent animals. Bison bone broth was a vital, healing food that provided essential nutrients during harsh winters when fresh food was scarce. The slow, patient cooking process extracted collagen, gelatin, minerals like calcium and magnesium, and rich marrow from the bones, creating a powerful, healing broth that could sustain entire families and nurse the sick back to health. Making traditional bison bone broth required planning and patience. The large, heavy leg bones and knuckle bones were cracked open to expose the marrow inside. They were then placed in pits lined with animal skins, covered with water, and heated by dropping in scorching hot stones from the fire. The process could take 24 to 48 hours, with fresh hot stones being added regularly to maintain a constant, gentle simmer. Some tribes would add wild vegetables like prairie turnips or lamb's quarters to the broth for extra flavor and nutrition. Finished broth has a rich, golden color and, when cooled, a thick, gelatinous consistency. This natural gelatin is incredibly healing for the gut lining and soothing for joint pain, while the minerals strengthen bones and teeth. Modern science has only recently confirmed what Native Americans knew instinctively for centuries. Bone broth provides a unique profile of amino acids like glycine and proline, which are crucial for supporting healthy skin, hair, and connective tissues. It was, and is, one of nature's most perfect superfoods. And so, our journey through these forgotten flavors comes to a close. From the creamy comfort of a mayonnaise cake to the rugged resilience of pemmican, each dish tells a story. They speak of hard times and ingenious solutions, of family gatherings and solitary trails. They remind us that food has never been just about fuel. It's about culture, it's about memory, and it's about love. By remembering these recipes, we do more than just learn about old-fashioned cooking. We honor the resilience, the creativity, and the spirit of the people who came before us. And maybe, just maybe, we can bring a few of these delicious ghosts back to our own tables. Thank you for joining me.